Hey everyone, so let's take a look how I created this scene right here inside Unreal Engine 5. I used the path tracer to render my scene, but you can also use Lumen if you want. I will walk you through the process of from blocking out the scene to framing a shot, and also how I actually rendered my scene right here, and a few tips here and there to make your render crisp like this. My first step was blocking out the scene. So I blocked out the scene by using the placeholders. These are amazing because then you can later on layer assets over it. You don't have to worry about the assets right now, but all you need to care about what props are actually going to be in the frame, and only place them using the basic shapes like circles, cylinders, square, and just frame your shot. Now imagine you want to build a building. The first and the foremost step would be building up the base. Blockouts are exactly the same. Once my blockout was done, my next step was to place the camera. Placing camera right away is super important because then you can frame your shot and only focus on the props that are actually going to be in your frame. Before going any further, let me just talk about the project settings I actually use for my renders. So I wanted to use path tracer to render my scene. Hence, it was very important to use support hardware ray tracing to have those nice ray trace shadows. And the second thing which was important was my lighting mode needs to be set to surface cache. If you want to use Lumen, you don't have to do that. You can skip that step. One note here is if you're using ray trace shadows or ray trace method to render your scene, you need to have a really good graphic card for that. So since I have a 3090, I was okay to do that. For my project, I was using the props from this website here called Polyheaven. First, they are totally free to use and they have a huge varieties of props that you can use from. You just need to go and search for it. Another place that you can use props from is the Fab, which is Unreal's marketplace, I would say, and it is amazing. It has huge varieties of props, characters, and even animations if you want to use for your projects. I also used few props from Fab for my project. Now, once I had downloaded my props, I wanted to add more story because the props that I downloaded were good, but I wanted to add more story to my scene. Hence, I went ahead and took it to Substance Painter and started texturing and adding few more scratches, few more grunges, and also started making the tone a bit dull so that it looked like as if it was an old vintage prop which wasn't used for a while. Once I was happy with my texturing, I exported all the textures from Substance Painter and imported them inside Unreal Engine 5. Once I had imported all the textures, I had to go ahead and turn off sRGB for all my metallic, roughness, and occlusion maps because they only represent linear data, and hence this is needed. Once this was done, I created my first material, which was a master material. I used the same master material for all my props. Now, why is that? Because if you have a lot of master material or unique material, it will have more draw calls to render your scene, which is not ideal. Hence, we create few master material or unique material, and the rest are all instances. Instances are child material of the master material. Instances are super handy when it comes to changing a certain parameter or you just want to swap textures for your props. You don't have to open your master material every time. The converted parameters from the master material are then now used in the instances and you can dynamically change it. Few of my props in my scene also had a glass element. So I went ahead and created my second master material only specifically for my glass objects. Once I converted my blend mode to transparent, I also wanted to use the metallic and roughness maps. So to do that, I had to go to the lighting mode and change it to surface translucency volume. Now I was able to use my roughness, metallic, and my other maps. Glass materials are often super expensive for rendering, and hence having a simple glass material is always beneficial. It is also nice to use the index of refraction, which is also known as IOR, because in real life, glass exactly behaves like that when a light is passed through it or hits the surface of the glass. Once I was done with creating all my master material, which are in my case only 2 of them, I started creating instances and started applying to the objects that I wanted to place in my scene. Now, I started placing my props inside my scene and started replacing my placeholders. I was very careful with how I align them because I know exactly from my blockouts which props are actually going to be in the scene. I started placing objects around my hero props as well because I wanted to create more depth in my scene, and hence in my case my hero prop was the vintage camera. Hence I wanted to make sure that I am placing my objects around it in a way that I have something in my foreground and also something in my background to create that depth. Now, few people might actually stop here, but I went ahead and started adding few more details because like I mentioned before, I wanted to make it look like more vintage and more kind of a old furniture which is unused for a while, and that's the reason why I added few more rubbles, few more decals on the surface to make it look more old. I also added few cobwebs to add more story and drama to my scene. Since I knew that my camera is gonna be a close-up camera, adding these details was very important. Once I was happy with creating my entire scene, I went ahead and created a folder for my HDRI, and I downloaded my HDRIs from the same website that I just mentioned before, which is Polyheaven. They have a huge collection of HDRIs, which is all free to use, and I downloaded a few of them that I thought might suit my scene here. So now is the fun part, which is lighting up the scene. I went ahead and deleted all my lights in my scene, and I started placing the HDRI in my scene. But wait a second, to add an HDRI to your scene, all you need to do is go to the settings, go to plugins from there, and type HDRI, enable it. Unreal will ask you to restart your engine. Once you're good with that, you will find your HDRI inside the Lights tab. A HDRI is a good starting point for adding some basic ambient lighting in your scene. And later on, you can just build over it, add more lights to your scene, and just customize your light the way you want. At times, after placing the HDRI in your scene, you may or may not get enough lighting, which is fine. All you need to do is increase the size of the dome, and then you should be good. Later, I just chose the best HDRI map that I thought would be the best for my scene, and then I just tweaked the HDRI angle, the rotation just slightly, so that I can have a light in my scene that mimicked a window lighting. Like I mentioned before, I wanted to use the path tracer to render my scene, so I went ahead and activated the path tracer, and this is the best time to do that. It's because since you're lighting up your scene, to get a basic judgment about how the path tracer works along with your lights is very important. The red bar that you see on the bottom of your screen is basically the progress bar. Right now, the path tracer is trying to calculate all the light in your scene, and slow and steadily, once that is done, it will give you a more stabilized image. Next, I added a rect light to my scene, and under the details panel, I went ahead and activated the ray trace shadows. After that, I went ahead and added a post-process volume in my scene. In order to make the glass materials or the glass objects work properly, I had to enable two settings. First is the reference atmosphere, and the second is reference depth of field. Please note that this is only important if you're using a path tracer to render your scene. Under Lumen, you don't have to do this. I wanted to play around with the exposure settings, and because I was not happy with how bright the scene was, I also tweaked a few more settings inside my post-process volume to make the entire scene look more rustic and old. That was best for my taste. Now for the cinematics, I added a level sequence to my scene and added all the necessary cameras that I wanted for my cinematic shot. I also added a few camera shakes to give a feel of a handheld camera for my cinematics. Now, I wanted to use render queue to render my scene. Now by default, the render queue wouldn't show up. You need to go under the plugins and make sure you enable it to make sure you have your render queue option under your renders tab. Now, if you click on the renders tab button, you should be able to find another option apart from the movie legacy, which is the movie render queue. Since I am using a path tracer to render my scene, I deleted the deferred rendering and added the path tracer. In order to render with the best possible image format, I deleted the JPG and added the EXR to preserve all the nice details. An EXR format image is very useful in the post-production, and hence I highly recommend to use the EXR. Then I also added the anti-aliasing and changed my temporal count and also my sample count to 16. Now that's crazy. You don't have to do that because the larger the sample count or the temporal count, it's gonna take more time to render one single frame. So imagine if you have around 2000 frames in your animation, which is your cinematic, it's gonna take a lot of time to render that. But also remember, more the sample count, less the noise. Hence, you need to choose wisely what sample count you want to render one single frame. I also added a color output tab and made sure my tone curve was disabled. If you want your renders to look exactly or match exactly to your viewport inside Unreal Engine 5, you need to add something called OCIO configuration to your render queue. Firstly, you need to activate this from the plugins folder, and once that's done, you need to create a new OCIO configuration and then add it to your render queue. In order to match the industry standard color profiles, I created my own OCIO configuration. I went ahead and added two index. One is for my input, which is gonna be the linear sRGB, and the other one is for my output, which is my ACES SCG. I also changed my display to sRGB ACES 1.0. Note that this is only to export the EXR images with these color profiles. Later, once you import the sequence inside DaVinci, I had to change it to linear sRGB again to match to my viewport. All I need to do is enable the OCIO config from the color management, and from the drop down I just had to add my own OCIO that I created. I also had to change the source to linear sRGB and the destination to ACES SCG, and then I clicked on render button. Later, inside DaVinci, I imported them as a sequence, and all I need to do is head over to the color management tab right here, and then I had to add the right color transform. So under the effects tab, I just typed color, and from there I just drag and drop my ACES transform, and from there all I need to do is make sure my input transform is set to ACES SCG right here, and my output transform is set to sRGB. And there you go. I was able to match my Unreal's viewport with my renders. Then my last step was basically color grading my scene. So I added a few more nodes and started playing around with the shadows, with the highlights, with also the dark values, and tried to push it towards more of a washed scene, which was very important for my vintage kind of a look. I also started adding a few more elements like window lighting, or like a haze of light coming inside from the window, and I also started adding some vignette in my scene to have more depth and focused view. In order to add more warmth to my scene, I wanted to add a tinge of yellow to the color temperature, and I also wanted to have some softer but cooler shadows to complement the warmth. Now my last step was basically rendering out the entire scene from DaVinci, and I choose MOV format for my renders. You can go with any format that you need. That's it from me for this episode, and I hope you liked the video and I hope you learned something. Take care. Bye.